When I joined the army, I thought I was fit. When I got to Sandhurst, I realised that there are levels to this. But my biggest challenge was when I went and did the Platoon Commander's Battle Course in Brecon. It's 4 months of pretty gruelling exercise, and it tests you and pushes you to your limits. The British Army have been using Brecon beacons to train since 1939. It is really harsh climate, it is very, very miserable conditions, and the terrain is pretty brutal. And if you can do it there, you can probably do it anywhere. In this video, I'm going to give you a reality check on why fitness is important, especially if you are joining the infantry. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. As you can see, we are leveling things up a little bit in terms of the professionalism backdrop and setting. So hopefully this is coming through. This is the first time in this type of studio. So hopefully this is actually going to be of use to you and not just a big waste of money. But let's see. In this video, I want to do something a bit different. I want to give you a genuine insight into the British Army fitness requirements, and especially if you are going into a leadership role, especially if you are joining the infantry like I did, why that is so important. And I'm going to give it to you through my own career. In my last video, you will remember that I spoke about, I guess, how disappointed I was that the British Army lowered their fitness standards for anyone aspiring to be an officer. Entry requirements, not necessarily output standards. But in this video, I'm going to break down my career, what it was like when I was joining the army, how I trained, what it was like when I was at Sandhurst, and then the early part of my career when I was at Brecon. Okay, so finishing off my training. I'm going to tell you in sort of no uncertain terms of where I f***ed up. Okay, so this is going to be a pretty honest account of things that I did well at, things that I could have done better at. And the whole aim is to give you the information that you actually need and motivate you more to prioritize your fitness, because it's one of those parts of leadership that if you have it, you can just rely on it throughout your entire life, throughout your entire career. That's why this is important, and this is what we're going to cover today. So let's go. All right, we're going to start by breaking down the first part, which is when I was actually joining the army. This is going to be a bit about back in my day, but this is what it was, right? So when I was joining the army, you had to pass AOSB. That's still the same. The only difference really is probably the fitness requirements. Back when I went and did AOSB, which is about a decade ago, so showing my age a little bit, but you had to complete the bleep test and you had to achieve level 10.2. It was capped. So similar to today, where they don't just let you run and run and run forever until everyone fails, they do cap you. Now, they actually cap you at 11.6 today, so it is higher. However, the pass mark, they've brought in a different pass mark, which, as I said in the last video, is just being dropped to 7.10, which is pretty despicable in my opinion. But anyway, it's not about that in this video. It's about what I was doing when I was joining the army. I was fit enough to pass the test, so I was getting 10.2 on the bleep test. I very much prioritized weight training, and when I prioritize weight training, I primarily mean bodybuilding. I don't think, now knowing what I know in the fitness space, especially as a qualified strength and conditioning coach, I definitely wasn't doing like proper strength or conditioning. I was mainly just doing bodybuilding. That would be my advice here, is to go into a purposeful strength building phase rather than bodybuilding. The other part is running. You have to get better at running. You are signing up to join the army, so there is no excuse whether you like it or not. You are opting in to have fitness as a part of your life. So I very, very, very much stress the fact that you need to be running regularly. 3 times a week is plenty. You will see a lot of progress if you run 3 times a week, but just mix up those runs. Think about what it is that you're trying to get out of each session instead of just going for a 5K best effort every single time. But that's a little bit about when I was joining the army, what I was doing. Was I fit enough? Yes. But let's move on to point 2. Point number 2. Now I'm going to talk to you about when I was actually at Sandhurst. So week 1 of the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, the commissioning course. What do you do as a regular officer cadet? You complete a fitness test. When I was there, we did what they called the PFA, which was a 1.5 mile run. Well, actually what it was a 2-minute max push-up test, a 2-minute max sit-up test, and then into a 1.5 mile run, which you had to get in 10 minutes 30 or below. For myself, I wanted to join the infantry. So typically people joining the infantry are going to be fitter. I ran something like 9 minutes 30. Okay, so that is still a minute faster than the pass mark. But where I realized there were levels to this is I was nowhere near the front. In fact, to be honest with you, I wasn't even middle of the pack. I was probably slightly lower. I wasn't nowhere near the back either, but I definitely wasn't strong. Okay, and that was the first eye-opener that I sort of had. It was the first time where a lot of people, a lot of your peers, I'd seen them run to their max, and I was just nowhere near the front. Many getting sub 8 minutes, and definitely loads getting sub 9 minutes. So I had work to do in order to commission into the infantry. Now, I wouldn't say I struggled with any of the fitness stuff whilst I was at Sandhurst. I'm not saying I found it easy, but I definitely don't think I ever struggled or was becoming back of the pack or anything. But it did show me, that was the first time where I really did think that my goal of joining the infantry was in jeopardy. It definitely wasn't going to be as straightforward, because I looked around at the other guys that were joining the infantry and a lot of them were considerably fitter. Now, if you're in that position, it doesn't necessarily mean it is game over. I am living proof, but you will have to do a lot of work in your own time to close that gap. And to be honest with you, it's impossible to close the gap completely. I've mentioned it so many times before. If that's the gap, to close that whilst you're at Sandhurst when everyone's getting fitter is going to be very difficult. But if you do a lot of fizz in your own time, then you can close it somewhat. And that's exactly what I did. Okay, I basically beasted myself to try and get fitter. And I did get fitter, and fortunately I ended up in my chosen regiment, the Royal Anglian Regiment, in the infantry. Sandhurst is competitive, and that was a particularly uncomfortable experience. So if I can just mention this, and a few people take this away and it inspires you to go for a run and get into some sort of decent program or training regime before getting to Sandhurst, because you have eyes on a particular regiment that's competitive, then that's a job well done for me, because this is genuinely my lived experience. It was not a comfortable process. Point number 3, and this is going to be the Platoon Commander's Battle Course at Brecon. Let's put this into perspective. At Sandhurst, typically those that do very well on the course will join the infantry. Now, there are other people that do really well that just want to go and have a slightly different career. So it's not verbatim, that's not always the rule. However, the trend is that the best recruits or the best cadets will typically join the infantry, okay, which is the most physically demanding, and I would probably go on the fact of like probably the most demanding on the leadership side as well, because you have to lead in very difficult conditions. I'm not saying anything else is easy, but from being in the infantry, it is difficult because you are physically exhausted a lot of the time as well. When you go to Brecon and you go and do the Platoon Commander's Battle Course, PCBC, you go down there and it's a bit of a change of pace. What I mean by that is you get quite comfortable towards the end of Sandhurst. You've been there almost a year. Then you go into what feels like a real man's environment, if you like, in the ungendered term, but an adult environment where there's no messing anymore. The DS were pretty shouty and pretty rigid with us, but they know the standard they need to get you to. And this is kind of where like there's no more games. You can still have a laugh, but it felt like a very, very serious course to me. The army have been there since 1939 using the Brecon beacons to train its soldiers, because it is a very, very challenging environment. And anyone in the infantry that wants to promote will have to go down and to Brecon beacons and complete an arduous course, whether that is to promote to Lance Corporal or Corporal, whether that is to promote to Sergeant, or whether that is to as an officer as well. You will go down and do an arduous course. We split that at the Infantry Battle School. We describe that as Junior Division, Senior Division, and the Platoon Commanders Division, PCD. At Brecon, again, you do loads of physical tests and the weight increases, but I think the biggest physical test, everyone would agree with me, is the fan dance. Now, I've put this out online a couple of times before, and the general conception seems to be that you only do the fan dance if you are on Special Forces selection, which is just not true. There are different routes, right? I've seen it on juniors, I know it happens on seniors, and I've done it on the Platoon Commanders course as well. So it happens all throughout. And to be honest, when I was at battalion, we actually did this for our private soldiers anyway. It's challenging, is basically what I'm trying to say. It's I think ours was about 15 miles in the end over very, very difficult terrain. And it took ages. Again, I want to stress that when I got down to PCD, I don't think I necessarily struggled on any of the fitness there up to that point either. You have to do a 2-miler when you're actually at Brecon, and that was one of the first tests that we did on the course. And it's full kit, so you've got about 25 kilos plus your helmet and weapon, and then you are running around a 2-mile loop. And actually at this particular camp, the route is quite disgusting as well. Even though it's 2 laps, you feel like you're constantly going uphill. It's a difficult route. And the pass mark's 18 minutes. Most people are getting well under that. I think I got about 16 minutes 30 or something, which was, in the army, they grade things as HC, C, NC. So highly competent, competent, or non-competent. And I think I got a competent. I think to get a highly competent score, you have to be below 16 minutes, which a lot of people got. But I was like, okay, cool. Well, I've done a 2-miler in a minute and a half faster than the pass mark. I was probably middle of the pack, feeling quite okay at that point. But the fan dance is completely different. It is a completely different beast. And this is where I probably had the worst day of my army career, right? Because it was quite embarrassing. Is during this route, it's split into different phases, but during the first half of this route, I really struggled to keep up with the pack. Well, I didn't keep up with the pack. Okay, I dropped back. And I could sit here and say I was injured and all this sort of stuff. None of it really matters. The reality is that I couldn't keep up with the pack because I wasn't fit enough, no matter what I had wrong with me at the time. And it's soul destroying. It is pretty grim. You are grafting as much as you can. Now, I managed to close the gap, so I didn't fail. But that first half, the first 2.5 hours of that process was horrendous for me. And I remember thinking, as I was plodding around that route, thinking like, I can't believe how much fitter these people are when I can pass all these tests. And I sort of said to myself that if I get through this day and I don't fail this process, then I will rectify this. Fitness will become a strength. And it has. More on that in a moment. But that was a big learning point for me. You get to the halfway point, you have like a 5-minute break, take on some food, whatever. And thankfully, the second half went a lot better. But it was not a comfortable experience. The other part that I really want to mention is that the day after, most of us were in clip, which is army slang for just being in shit state. Okay, could barely walk. The fittest on the course, I'm not saying they were in tip-top condition, but they were pretty much fine. Why am I sharing this? Because there's levels. Okay, there are different levels to fitness, and it's not just the pass mark. I learned it in such a hard way. I actually think that it makes me a very good coach, because I know what it's like to be at the back of a pack, and I know that feeling of being like, oh shit, this is a horrendous experience. Unfortunately, it's the only time in my career that happened. And afterwards, I did get fit. You know, now, fast forward now, I'm out of the army, but I still pride myself on my fitness. I run a sub 20-minute 5K. I deadlift over 200 kilos. Like, I am pretty decent at fitness. But by no means saying I'm the fittest bloke in the world or anything, but I can hold my own. And I know that if I was to do this course again, I'd be much better. But I wish I was fitter back then. I really wish I had prioritized endurance, because events like this require endurance and strength and all of everything, okay, to go into this mindset and whatever. But it is so important to turn up fit, otherwise you are seriously going to struggle. Okay, that is it for this week's video. I hope that was useful, an insight into some of the struggles. And I also want to say that there might be people in the army that say if that was your worst day in uniform, then you've had an absolute touch. I completely get that, right? I did go on tour, but it wasn't a particular punchy tour, right? So I get it. Some people have had much harder moments in uniform than I have. However, this was something that was really, really sort of devastating for me at the time. And I was genuinely very concerned about whether I would be able to hold my own. And it puts seeds of doubt into your mind. Not saying that everyone's going to be that fit when you get to battalion, they're definitely not. But if you can turn up as fit as you can to do these things and just be able to rely on fitness as you go through this process, everything else will become a whole lot easier. If this content's useful, please do like, click subscribe, and click the bell so you can be notified every time I upload a video. That's it. I will see you next week with a brand new video. In a bit.